question number 1, I call Fiona Hyslop.
To ask the Scottish Government what additional action it plans to take to tackle gender-based harassment in schools in light of its response to the report Misogyny, a Human Rights Issue.
Well, so over the past few years of having to subject myself to fuck knows how many hours of feminist tripe, climate alarmism, race-baiting dribble, etc., I've come to find that there's certain discussions that take place in the Rainbow Unicorn Parliament that I now consider to be somewhat malevolent, given the fact that had I not over time come to learn the meanings of many of the things referenced between Rainbow delegates, I'd presumably just hear the initial back and forth and think nothing more of it. And sadly, I assume that if there is, in fact, members of the public out there who do, like I, subject themselves to this nonsense on a regular basis, they too will probably just fall foul to the same problem, the same tricks, essentially. And tricks they are, or I would consider them to be, because even in this little back and forth here between the Education Secretary and Climatologist Fiona Hyslop, another feminist fucking non-entity, they are in abundance in that Parliament, let's make no bones about it. But even in this little back and forth between the two, there's a few phrases that get brought up that sound relatively different to what they actually mean fundamentally. They have a tendency to redefine words, and they have a tendency to have hidden meanings to some of the phrases that they will use to describe certain things. So obviously, Fiona Hyslop made reference to Helena Kennedy, the feminist, who shares the exact same worldview as all the feminists in Parliament, so it was no surprise that a groundbreaking report would inevitably surface that would showcase exactly what the feminists in Parliament would want any hypothetical report to conclude. But so this is their go-to now. They will always refer to this when they wish to push for more feminist nonsense. On top of that, of course, this is the same report that's redefined misogyny, made a 21st century approved definition, a modernised definition, which is absolutely nothing like the initial definition. Ludicrous, in fact. It's the same report that actually had the audacity to justify why they were not going to be including misandry as a aggravator for any hypothetical hate crime legislation going forward. Misogyny 101. Yeah. Anyhow, it's what comes next that I find somewhat interesting. As I said, it's just the back and forth that takes place, and there's only a few things referenced, but what they say and what they mean, two different things.
A range of actions are being taken forward to address gender-based violence and harassment in schools. Alongside relationships and sex education, there are a number of targeted programmes to support positive behaviour in relationships, mentors in violence prevention to tackle gender stereotyping and attitudes condoning violence against women and girls, equally safe at school to tackle gender-based violence, and fearless to educate and support pupils to speak up about crime.
And the first thing that was referenced there was gender-based violence. Specification as to which gender in particular is prioritised or comes to referring to gender-based violence. But just to clear the air there, it's all about females. So naturally you're supposed to assume, once you know that gender-based violence simply means male on female violence, physical violence. Hence the term violence. We all know how to define violence, we all know the definition of violence, but that's not exactly what they fucking mean when they refer to gender-based violence. Oh, no. In fact, according to the Scottish Government's own website, it says the following, that gender-based violence is a function of gender inequality and an abuse of male power and privilege. So right off the bat, they're redefining words, absolutely. Of actions that result in physical, sexual and psychological harm or suffering to women and children, or affront to their human dignity, including threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. It is men who predominantly carry out such violence, and women who are predominantly the victims. By referring to violence as gender-based, this definition highlights the need to understand violence within the context of women and girls' subordinate status within society. So, we've gone from gender-based violence, which, as I said, you would automatically assume, would be something along the lines of physical altercations, Violence being the operative word within said statement, raising your hand, whatever it may be. But instead of that, it's talking about subordinate status, male power and privilege abuse, and stereotypes. Yes, of course. So naturally, the assumption is from the Scottish Government that gender-based violence, one of the reasons that it occurs is down to the fact that there is a power imbalance. Males have too much power within society and they abuse said power and have too much privilege. So we have to equal the playing field, so to speak, in order. So when Shirley Anne Summervile makes reference to the fact that a range of actions are being taken across schools in order to eradicate gender-based violence, a different picture begins to emerge.
Forward to address gender-based violence and harassment in schools. Alongside relationships and sex education, there are a number of targeted programmes to support positive behaviour in relationships, mentors in violence prevention to tackle gender stereotyping and attitudes condoning violence against women and girls.
And a reference to stereotyping. And one of the long-term goals that the feminists in Scotland have had for some time is to achieve gender equality. And in doing so, they claim that will lead to the complete and utter eradication and removal from society of gender-based violence, etc. Now, in order to achieve what they claim to be gender equality, they naturally have to go after the children in order to eradicate the gender stereotypes that they claim are placed upon them from very young ages, which then lead boys and girls to grow up to be men and women, etc., who then in turn pick different subjects in schools based on said stereotypes and go on to have very different lives. And the roles that women end up being in as a result of the stereotypes placed upon them from very young ages, which according to them leaves women and girls in situations that are classified as subordinate in status within society. And of course, they blame this on social structures and gender roles, which greatly influence women's vulnerability. Okay. It's important to take into consideration as well that the people that are pushing forward this legislation and the people that are running rampant within our government, the feminist cabal, if you will, have already classified gender in and of itself as social construct. Therefore, any gender roles, gender stereotypes, etc., they're all by default, by extension, social constructs. Which is why they are hell-bent on breaking down so-called gender norms, social constructs, and which will in turn help to ensure greater gender equality, quote-unquote, within society, thus eradicating the violence against women and girls. Yeah, okay, that's what they want you to believe, but the reality of the matter is it all boils down to the fact that the Scottish Government, for some time, have been hell-bent on going after children as young as possible, as previously stated, to eradicate the gender stereotypes in order to achieve gender equality. It recognises that the earliest years of life are crucial to a child's development and have a lasting impact on outcomes and opportunities later in life. They're committed to reducing so-called inequalities from the earliest years, and this is why we have made an unprecedented level of investment in early years through universal measures such as the expansion of early learning and childcare, nearly doubling the entitlement from 600 to 1,148 hours per year for all 3 and 4-year-olds, and an eligible 2-year-old from August 2020. Quality of early learning and childcare is already high in Scotland, with the aim being to use the opportunity of the expansion to continually improve the quality of ELC in Scotland, with the mechanism for this being the national standard, a clear set of quality criteria that any provider offering the funded entitlement will have to meet from August 2020, gender stereotyping in ELC. So naturally, when they goad parents into believing that this is a great and wonderful thing that the government are doing by introducing and expanding childcare for all for very young children, the reality of the matter is that when you place your child into one of these settings, there are standards in place that need to be followed and guidance and whatnot that need to be adhered to, and that is all about eradicating gender inequality, eradicating the stereotypes in order to achieve what they proclaim as gender balance. Academic research highlights the negative impact on all children from gender stereotyping. Yes, okay, so this is the feminist shite coming into effect here, because they don't really give two hoots about any stereotypes that prevail when it comes to boys and men. What they really want is to go after the girls and the men, as they cannot stand the fact that men and women pick different subjects, men and women choose different careers in general and on average. We recognise the importance of addressing gender imbalances in the early years. A recent literature review by Education Scotland on improving gender balance found that there are no inherent differences between genders which should limit a person's interests, capabilities or ambitions. also highlighting that gender stereotypes and unconscious bias have an impact on children's outcomes. Practitioners may have differing expectations of boys and girls, and it can be boys or girls who can be disadvantaged by this. Identifying and addressing stereotyping in these settings can reduce a range of gender imbalances. With the government and its partners committed to address gender stereotyping in early years and beyond, this is reflected in a diverse range of actions which aspire to promote gender equality in early years settings and reduce harmful gender stereotyping. There's that reference again to gender stereotyping, because bear in mind, of course, one of the assumptions is that violence against women, they proclaim that alongside many other things such as quote-unquote misogyny, most of these things take place across society because of outdated stereotypes. So they want to eradicate the gender stereotypes, and naturally, of course, they insist that this is to promote a society which is rife with gender equality and empowerment for the girls, etc., etc. While they will try to fob you off with tales of trying to promote gender equality, the reality of the matter is the people that are pulling the strings, the people that are hell-bent on insisting that this is promoted across Scottish society, are doing so to ensure that the birth rates do not see a reverse in trends, to ensure that as many girls as possible across Scotland feel empowered and grow up to be more career-inspired, career-driven, or feminist activists. Maybe all three, who knows? But fundamentally, the one thing that they don't want any girl to leave school being is family-orientated and in need or in yearning for a family of their own. Often you will hear them making reference to disparities across society, whether that be in the school or whether that be in the work life for adults. For example, they will point to STEM and the lack of females that tend to go into the STEM subjects. They will inevitably point to gender stereotypes that have been placed upon these children from a very young age, and that's just yet another justification to continue to push for eradicating them from as young as possible. And this is what I seem to be somewhat devious about the whole matter, as obviously when they're referring to harassment within the case of schools, gender-based violence is brought up, which I've already touched upon, and then they go on to talk about stereotypes. When they make reference to the need to challenge stereotypes within school in order to quote-unquote tackle the harassment within school, that is their in to continue to push the shit that I've just touched upon. Quite malevolent shit, really, when you think about it, but they don't need much of an excuse. They're very opportunistic within the Rainbow Unicorn Parliament.
A range of actions are being taken forward to address gender-based violence and harassment in schools. Alongside relationships and sex education, there are a number of targeted programmes to support positive behaviour in relationships, mentors in violence prevention to tackle gender stereotyping and attitudes condoning violence against women and girls, equally safe at school to tackle gender-based violence.
And then Equally Safe was brought up, which is a strategy that's been in place for some time to apparently eradicate violence against women, but obviously in this context we're talking about within the schooling system. Equally Safe is described as being the country's strategy to take action on all forms of violence against women and girls, and by this they mean the violent and abusive behaviour that's carried out predominantly by men directed at women and girls precisely because of their gender. Behaviour that stems from systemic, and this is the bit to take note of here, behaviour that stems from deep-rooted systemic women's inequality. Now, how do they define women's inequality? Well, naturally, that's things along the lines of disparities. Not enough women in CEO positions, not enough women that are police chiefs, etc., etc. They want to eradicate the gender norms. They want to create a level playing field. They want to tackle the power imbalances within society, those same power imbalances that naturally lead women to be in so-called subordinate statuses, or in this case, girls, which inevitably would lead to the so-called stereotypes and assumptions that justify violence and harassment against girls within school settings. Now, naturally, the fluff that you will be fobbed off with when you hear about Equally Safe, or the strategy of Equally Safe, is that it's all about ensuring that women and girls are protected. But the reality of the matter is how they claim that they are going to get to the bottom of gender-based violence or violence against women, domestic violence, etc., etc., is, as it says, yet again, that they intend to eliminate the systemic gender inequality that lies at the root of the violence. So the same thing is apparent, the same thing is true when it comes to the context of schools. And it all ties in neat and nice to the fact that they are hell-bent on eradicating the gender stereotype. So this is just giving them yet another in. But it's all disguised and masquerade as a simple conversation regarding what can be done to ensure that harassment towards girls within schools declines, is eradicated completely. the earlier that there is a shift in discriminatory cultures, attitudes and behaviours, the better. And the education system is a key setting for this kind of intervention. Education in early years professions therefore have an opportunity to lead the way in attitude change, being in a prime position to nurture future generations on positive gender roles and healthy, equal relationships from an early age. Beyond education, leadership across the public, private and third sectors will be crucial in helping to develop positive cultures and behaviours that end violence against women, right? And we already know how that's really defined as opposed to how it sounds. Then we come down to the bottom, of course, though, but it says, yet again, the more that we do to tackle the root causes of violence against women and girls, the sooner we will achieve our shared goal of preventing and eradicating the problem altogether. Now, how do they eradicate the problem? How do they go after the problem? Well, that is obviously to start tackling the outdated stereotypes, the misogyny that is placed upon boys from a very young age. The stereotypes, so fucking malevolent the way that these feminists operate. It says here that one of their priorities for the future when it comes to achieving or eradicating violence against women and girls, they wish to see a society where women and girls thrive as equal citizens, socially, culturally, economically and politically. And then it says that women and men will have equal access to power being the operative word, and resources, as if they don't already, you know. Societies in which women's participation is valued and where there are fewer economic, social or political differences in power between men and women have lower levels of violence. But equality alone will not suffice. We know from Scandinavian countries where high levels of violence against women and girls persist despite those countries being close to achieving gender equality in the workplace, that the attitudes and structures that underpin the violence must also be addressed. So it's never going to be enough. Make the claim that attitudes and structures underpin so-called violence, and that needs to be addressed, which justifies yet another in for feminism.
Stereotyping and attitudes condoning violence against women and girls, equally safe at school to tackle gender-based violence, and fearless to educate and support pupils to speak up about crime. The Gender-Based Violence in Schools Working Group are developing a national framework to ensure consistent messaging on gender-based harassment for everyone working with young people.
Fiona Hyslop.
The Scottish Government will be aware that organisations such as Girl Guiding Scotland and Zero Tolerance have called for the introduction of more specific gender equality and consent-based sex and relationship studies as part of Curriculum for Excellence. Can I ask what progress the Scottish Government has made to address these calls for preventative measures to be taken, and if such an implementation is to go ahead, what support and resources can the Scottish Government offer schools and local authorities in the meantime to ensure teachers are confident in dealing with any complaints or reports of sexual harassment in their schools? And it wasn't quite clear from the original answer what additional measures have been taking place by the government in addition to the measures you just said in response to the report, Misogyny, a Human Rights Issue.
Can I thank Fiona Hyslop for raising this very important issue, and I'm very grateful to the organisations that she mentioned for engaging with the Scottish Government. The Government obviously wants all children and young people to develop mutually respectful, responsible and confident relationships, and that's why we're committed to ensuring all children and young people receive high quality relationships, sexual health and parental education, so pupils learn about safe and healthy relationships. We will shortly bring forward a consultation on revised RSHP teaching guidance, which is seeking to provide a focus on learning and teaching about gender equality and consent education.
Seeing again there, consent education and gender equality. Now what is gender equality? That is feminist opportunism yet again. Any fucking excuse.
Alongside the initiatives already mentioned, Education Scotland's National Improvement Hub contains resources to support professionals. We are, of course, also committed, as part of our shared policy programme with the Scottish Green Party, committed to exploring what further actions beyond those already planned, including guidance for schools, are required.
And all just to conclude, just a simple discussion between two feminists within Parliament, where they will make reference to umpteen things in their wee back and forth. But it's always interesting to read between the lines, so to speak, because you'd be amazed as to what half of these things really fucking mean. What they truly mean, you begin to see exactly what they intend to implement. Right under your nose, more often than not. Peace.